What do we know about the career-related consequences or importance of learnability? This is, of course, very important to all of us. What I said so far is maybe interesting, but a number of factors that say more about the human species in general. We want to know how that affects people and their work. And a few years ago, we did a very, very big meta-analysis of the predictors of academic performance. Okay, so in school, primary school, high school, university, postgraduate, and what you find is, of course, that IQ is a predictive variable. You also find that motivational levels, so whether it's conscientiousness or ambition, also contributes to higher academic performance. But there was a third pillar that hadn't been considered by people before, which is curiosity. People who are more open, more inquisitive, end up doing better. Even though most of the formal educational system everywhere is almost designed to destroy curiosity, because you're supposed to kind of vomit back in an exam what the teacher or the professor said during the, and it's very kind of convergent in its teaching, and it's still based on a very, very old, archaic model of knowledge reproduction. And even so, people who are more curious with higher learnability, who actually, it's a much less economic approach to studying, because you get carried away and start reading about lots of things that are not relevant to the exam paper or to the assessment, they still ended up doing better, even when we statistically control for the level of IQ, for their previous academic performance, and for how conscientious they are. Why is that important? Because, of course, how you do in your studies influences how well you do later on. Not necessarily because of what you learn, but because in your CV, in your resume, it will be an important filter. Yeah? In most places, you can't get good jobs unless you have certain academic qualifications. We also know that learnability is a major driver of employability. Okay? So if you think of employability as the ability to gain and maintain a desired job, there's huge differences between people, even if they are in the same country or city and from the same social class, or even factoring out all these extrinsic variables, there's huge differences in how employable people are. Okay? And why is there a camel in this slide? Some of you might be, especially those who can't filter out irrelevant thoughts, are like, why is there a camel? What? And I'm sure you have incredible stories about why there is a camel. It's very boring, the reason why there is a camel. There's an old joke in psychology. We say a camel is a horse designed by a committee. Okay? And the issue that I want to highlight is that so many people keep reinventing competency frameworks and models, etc., to think of employability. Is actually very, very simple. There are just three major dimensions that distinguish or that predict different levels of employability: ability, likability, and drive. Okay, that's it. Of course, you can double-click on this, and there will be different, sub-facets or sub-levels. I mean, ability, what is it? What do we mean? Is it IQ? Is it curiosity? Is it expertise? Is it knowledge? I mean, it's all of those things. And it's important to remember that it's also very domain-specific, right? Organizational psychologists and consultants sometimes forget this. Like, even if the person flying your plane has a great sense of humor and is a transformational leader, you probably want them to be a pilot, right? And even if the person about to do a root canal in your teeth is, you get the gist, right? So, I mean, technical skills and expertise is important, but at the same time, we know that ability is becoming more and more of a soft skill in the way we think, and that it's more not about, it's not just, or nowadays, predominantly not about what you know already or what you can do, but what you could do and what you could learn. And that's why learnability is so important. Okay, you can have people with the same qualifications, same expertise, same experience, but if I can predict what they're supposed to do in 6 weeks or 6 years, I'll be better off betting on someone who can probably learn it, even if I don't know what it is. Okay, and that's going to be more likely if somebody is more curious. And then you have likability, which is basically EQ, and drive, which is basically ability or motivations. I mean, if you think about employability, this is it. It's very, very simple. And even though it's simple, it's not that easy to think of many people, case studies, that have 3 out of 3, right? Think about, of course, you all do. But if you think about the people you work with or who work for you, how many really would you say they're really able, they're really likable, and they're really hardworking? Mostly, if they're doing well, probably 2 out of 3. And there's an interesting interplay here. A lot of the times people who are very able are obnoxious. People who are not so able work really hard. And then you have, but 3 out of 3 will almost certainly make you successful. Even if your boss hates you and doesn't want to promote you, you're going to get there eventually. 2 out of 3, you probably have a job. 1 out of 3, probably you don't. 0 out of 3, probably unemployable. I was giving a similar presentation a while ago in Germany, and when I said, 1 out of 3 probably unemployed, 0 out of 3, somebody said, you can work for the government. I said, okay. Germans and their sense of humor. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you think about ability, you can think about learnability as a critical component or driver of ability levels, not just what people know today, but what they could know in the future. We also know that learnability boosts employee engagement, and it's so important to understand that engagement affects not just individual, but also team and organizational levels of performance. These are 3 main drivers of engagement. They all have a relationship to learnability. When you leave people alone and you give them time and you enable them to develop or unleash their curiosity, they will be more engaged. By doing that, you help people develop a sense of mastery. They know that they're working not just because of the salary or benefits or to pay the bills, but actually they're growing and developing. And most importantly, it gives people a sense of purpose, okay? Which is very, very important. I know that sometimes it gets kind of overhyped by the positive psychology community, but meaning and purpose is important. It's a sign of progress that 100 years after the invention of scientific management and Fordism and assembly line, we are worrying about, does this job mean something for me and does it have a sense of purpose? It means that we've progressed and evolved, okay? And even so, you can see how rarely these things happen in the world of work today, okay? So we know from employee engagement surveys that only about 30% of people are engaged. If you watch Mad Men, this is a very good slide to illustrate this. Don Draper, clearly the most valuable employee and talent in his advertising agency, and he works about 20 minutes a day, right? And the rest is drinking or smoking or eating lunch or sleeping. This is him in one of his power naps. And I mean, this happens a lot. It's a terrible loss of productivity, especially when your most talented employees are not engaged and they don't care. Okay? It's been calculated that in the US alone, there's a productivity loss of about $450 billion a year caused by disengagement. How many walls could we build? Sorry. Then we also know that there's a lot of people who are passive job seekers. I think it's very interesting. For example, LinkedIn, which has about 450 million members, reckons that about 70% of those members are considered passive job seekers. Somebody at LinkedIn once told me, we have a lot of data to crunch, but what we can tell for sure based on this data is that when somebody updates their profile, they're looking for a job, actively. Otherwise, they're waiting. And so a lot of people are not actively sending resumes or applications, but they're hoping for better job opportunities. I always think we don't understand the severity of it. If you think about the equivalent in the realm of relationships, imagine if 75% of married people were open to a better opportunity, not actively seeking, but I mean, we would surely talk about a crisis of marital satisfaction. Divorce rates are 50%, which is lower than that, right? We also know that self-employment is on the rise, even in places where job opportunities abound and where unemployment rates are fairly low. And so this is one of the symptoms or consequences of disengagement. Most people, of course, work for themselves in order not to have a boss, not to have a manager, or because it's harder to complain about your boss when you are the boss. And at the same time, there's a rise in startup activity. A line that I've stolen from Harvard Business Review. It was an article they wrote a couple of years ago, "The Dangerous Rise of Entrepreneurship Porn." It's a great title. I wish I had come up with it. Silicon Valley, great show, makes fun of these people, right? Everybody. I've been teaching MBA students for about 15 years. And in the beginning, they wanted to work for Deloitte, JP Morgan, then Google, Facebook. Now, they all think they're going to be the next Elon Musk. And the chances of success are 0.00001 of that level of success. Even the chances of launching a business and still being in existence 5 years later or having employees are less than 5%, okay? So it's all good fueling these ambitious, but they're unrealistic expectations, and it's often talented people who would be a great resource for organizations. So the underlying causes of this thing is the same thing. People are disenchanted with their work. If we help people develop and nurture their learnability in organizations, we would have less of this. Okay, so with Mara, we wrote a short article referencing this issue in HBR last year on how and what employers can do to develop and nurture people's learnability. And another reason, we also know that learnability prevents or at least slows down automation or the chances that your job or that you are automated. Okay. And I know you heard a lot about automation. Jonas speaks a lot about automation. He's a great expert in the subject. I don't want to talk too much about this. This is a great image, isn't it? Could be your future boss. This is a great book that I want to recommend by Martin Ford, Rise of the Robots. Really, really well written. He's a journalist, but a lot of data. I'm sure some of you might be familiar with Raymond Kurzweil, Google's futurist, the polymath who has 150 patents and who thinks he's going to live forever. He talks, of course, about singularity. I think this is a very interesting, at least conceptually or high level, it's a very interesting idea, the fact that humans have reached the pinnacle or the limits of biological evolution. We can only evolve further if we merge with technology or become as one with technology. And of course, you can see in this simple slide here that humans have used technology for a long, long time. Our ancestors used technology for a long, long time. This is also a funny slide showing how sometimes becoming more comfortable or more dependent with technology can harm or have a negative impact on us physiologically as well. But it's an interesting idea, this idea that, if you think about it already now, and you think about two hypothetical countries or cultures, one that is really, really comfortable and at ease with technology and very high tech, and the other that doesn't have technology, you can think how the techno kind of savvy country or system will outperform the other. Okay, so it's also interesting that although technology makes us capable of smarter outputs, it also makes us dumber in a way because we become very, very dependent and all of our knowledge and information is outsourced. But I think, from a kind of employability standpoint, the interesting thing here is that you have on the one hand machines trying to become more spiritual, to use Ray Kurzweil's line, or more like human. And also humans becoming more like machine-like, okay? Some of you might be quite similar to this character here, not far off, right? If you're connected via 2, 3, 4 devices and maybe have some other at home, etc. So, it's an interesting crossover potentially, right? And I think, we're living in the age of this sort of spiritual workaholic in a way, right? There's something from the beginnings of scientific management theory, this idea that if you measure and quantify everything and divide jobs into molecular components, you can turn people into productivity machines, hasn't fully gone away, right? That's why we have the quantified self and all these wearables, etc., because we want employees to be engaged and find meaning, but we also want to turn them into productive machines. If not, we'll use machines instead, okay? So it makes sense that if you can learn new skills and nurture your curiosity, and if you never stop learning, that you will have an edge, at least over the people who don't do that. Yeah, this old story of two guys who I think Sternberg used it in the book Successful Intelligence. It opens up with this story of two guys who are in the forest and they see a big bear. And one guy says to the other, let's start running. And the other guy starts putting on his running shoes. And the guy says, what are you doing? The bear will still catch you. Yeah, but I'm going to be faster than you. Okay, so you can think about, at least from a pragmatic or evolutionary survival of the fittest metaphor as learnability as something that might not make you smarter than machines, but it might make you smarter than other people who will be outperformed by machines quicker.